You're listening to the best of Lee Elci on 94.9 News Now.
Here in the studio with me right now is Pastor Andy Sorenson. Pastor, first, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming on. I know a little bit about you, but I also want to apologize. I'm sitting here, and I realize that you are out in the lobby. And I look down at my shirt and I see I have a Black Sabbath shirt on. So sorry that I'm so stupid. But thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
It's all good, Lee.
All right, so tell me, you're a Coast Guard guy, right?
Right, 22 years.
Give me some background on where you're from. Where were you born? How'd you get here?
I was born in Minnesota.
Okay.
My dad's a Lutheran pastor. Actually, I didn't mention that. He's been a pastor for 50 years.
Wow.
50 years in the ministry.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. And but I was born in Minnesota. We lived on the Eastern Shore of Maryland for a while. Then I grew up predominantly in Cleveland, Ohio. So,
all right. So you went to Coast Guard,
right? I went to the Coast Guard Academy in 1984. Graduated with Glenn Solmacy,
right.
one of your friends here from the show. Yeah, we took a lot of classes together. We were both government majors.
All right. So help me out here. So how does somebody who's going to the Coast Guard government major become a pastor? Or is that something you always knew you were going to end up doing? Or are you following Dad's footsteps? How does that work?
No, it's actually something I never wanted to do. My dad always, he thought, yeah, it'd be cool if Andy followed in my footsteps.
Right.
And my brother Matt, who's older, he's also a pastor, but he went off to the Naval Academy first. It's weird, but I saw how hard my dad worked and some of the stress of the job, and I said, it's not something I ever want to do.
Yeah.
God had other plans for me, though, and I had graduated from grad school with a master's in information systems technology, and one day God said, "You're going to be a pastor." And I'm like, "No, this is crazy. I don't want to do it." But he made it happen, and obviously I retired from the Coast Guard after 22 years, and I've been a pastor at Faith Lutheran Church in Groton now for 3 years. It's been wonderful.
All right, so tell me, and I'm so sorry about this, but I'm so ill-informed when it comes sometimes to this area, but what is the difference between a pastor and a priest, if you can, and a reverend? And is there a huge difference between the three?
No, not really.
You're married?
I am.
Okay, so
yep.
you can get married whereby priests and they can't, right?
Roman Catholic priests can't. Orthodox priests sometimes can.
Okay.
Depends on different strictures in their church. Lutheran pastors, Martin Luther strongly believed that pastors should have the right to be married.
Very good.
And should be married.
Okay, so how long have you been married?
I've been married. We're coming up on 25 years.
Good for you.
So yeah,
you got a big present to buy this year. 25 is a big deal. All right. So speaking of marriage, which is basically why you're here today, well, in a roundabout way, but certainly a part of the equation. You sent me a number of very well-written, brilliant emails and stated your case. So let's talk a little bit about the ruling from the Supreme Court and how it affects you and your thoughts and your beliefs when it surrounds that. So give me a little once-over on that.
Yeah. Although, I went to school with Glenn Solmacy. He went off on the law track. I'm not a lawyer. So keep that in mind when I speak about the Supreme Court ruling. I'm mainly drawing from Justice Roberts' dissent here. And he makes 3 points that really affect the church. And one is that by the Supreme Court making this a constitutional right for same-sex couples to be married, it takes away any accommodation that the states in the past have afforded to protect religious rights. In other words, the state of Connecticut has for years now allowed same-sex couples to be married, but the state said, we're going to protect the rights of pastors so that they're not forced to perform same-sex marriages. Roberts made it very clear in his arguments during the oral argument section of the hearing that you can't do that anymore. Those state laws can't apply because now it's a constitutional right. So those state accommodations are gone. The next point that Roberts makes in his dissent is that churches and religious organizations such as schools or hospitals or adoption agencies that don't accommodate same-sex partners would be subject to lose their tax-exempt status. And that happened in the case of Bob Jones University several years ago, where they opposed interracial marriage, but he said the same principles apply. And finally, he makes a point that the majority, in their opinion, implies that people who disagree with same-sex marriage are bigots. So they use some very uncivil language in their dissent, which leads to more problems for people of conscience.
All right, so does that mean that you now will be, you personally, your church is now going to be forced into having ceremonies for same-sex couples if they come to your door?
Well, it's a possibility now. And by taking away the state accommodation and saying that it's a constitutional right, if I as a pastor act as an agent of the state by signing the state marriage license for a heterosexual couple, then I am also liable acting as an agent of the state. I'm not allowed to discriminate based on sexual orientation or same-sex couples. So
right.
In theory now, I'm supposed to sign that for a same-sex couple.
All right, but you have a strong belief against that, right?
Correct.
Now, not all pastors, even within your same church, if you will, have that same feeling, right?
Well, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has every pastor who's ordained takes a vow that they believe that the Lutheran confessions are a true exposition of Scripture, and so we believe. So within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, every pastor should feel the same way that I do.
Okay.
But there are other Lutheran denominations that don't feel that way and do accommodate same-sex couples.
So within that same kind of an idea of a religion, there's a few differences, if you
Right.
will. All right, so is it in your scriptures that same-sex couples can't get married? Does it say that? Or how is it worded, I guess?
So in the Bible, it is pretty clear that marriage is between one man and one woman.
Okay.
It's ordained by God. It's established in the book of Genesis right off the start. And then Jesus Christ himself reaffirms it in the Gospel of Matthew. He says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined together with his wife. Let what God has joined together, let no man take apart. I mean, that's pretty clear to me that it's one man, one woman, and Jesus says from a father and a mother, because that's the family unit. And furthermore, God esteems marriage above all other institutions because he protects it with 2 commandments. 2 of the 10 commandments are focused on protecting marriage.
So are you against civil unions then? Are you against two men being together or 2 women being together in a general sense of things?
So I want to go back to one thing you said earlier. You said in your scriptures, I don't think there's such a thing as my scripture.
Okay.
I think there's scripture.
Okay.
And so there's 3 laws mentioned in scripture. There's God's ceremonial law, there's God's moral law, and then there's civil law.
Okay.
And you got to keep the 3 separate at times. And under civil law, under the U.S. Constitution, which is civil law, I believe that everyone deserves equal protection under that law.
Okay.
So it appalls me that people are beaten for being homosexual or for being of a different race. The things that our country has done with race and even gender it's disgusting. Christians are called to love one another and support one another. So yes, I think under civil law that same-sex couples should be afforded the right to visit one another, the right to inherit property and to get the same tax breaks that a married couple would get.
But you just don't want to be forced into having to provide that service of a marriage certificate if you personally don't want to do that, right?
So there's a difference. You say marriage certificate, and that's something I continue to provide.
Right.
So the church provides a marriage certificate, and we say, yes, this couple's been married in the eyes of God and before the congregation here. And so I'll continue to provide certificates. What I won't do now is sign the state-authorized license.
Okay.
So if a couple comes to me and wants to be married, what I'm doing is I'm keeping the state out of the church. And for those who are really strong proponents of separation of church and state, as am I, it also keeps the church out of the state. So I do the religious ceremony. They're married in the eyes of God and the congregation, and then they can go to the Justice of the Peace, the courthouse, whatever agency the state has established, and they can take care of the state obligation.
All right, so you had emailed me that you are no longer going to provide that service. So you are actually still going to provide the ceremony. You're just not going to sign that document anymore for anybody.
Right.
That's your way pretty much around having to do it for a same-sex couple.
Yes,
okay.
And this was actually an idea that I was contemplating before this ruling ever came down, because it really does separate me as a pastor from having to be obligated to the state to perform certain things.
All Our number is 860-464-9490, 631-317-1949. Pastor Andy Sorenson's here, kind enough to come in to the studio. He's the pastor at the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. Is that how we say that?
Synod.
What's the Missouri part of that?
The church was founded in Missouri.
Missouri, okay. I mean, you can tell I'm clueless on this stuff. So, all right. So, are you getting a lot of? I mean, clearly you're a nice guy. You know, you're willing in almost just about every single area to be accommodating for just about anybody who comes along. Are you catching a lot of negative feedback from some of this from the community?
I would have to say one of my neighbors approached me and he's like, why should the church be tax exempt? Why shouldn't you be taxed just like every other business? So what's so special about the church that you deserve this tax exempt status?
Right.
So, and my answer is the founding fathers saw the church as a key element for this country to be a democratic republic. So they saw that the church had value. We add not only direct financial value to the community, but direct and indirect social value to the community. There's less violence against women. There's less domestic violence. There's less drug use. Kids that attend church are 5 times less likely to skip school. They do better in math, in reading. They go on to complete more degrees than non-church kids. There's church goers tend to volunteer in the community more often. They tend to be more generous in donating to non-church charities. The church attracts people from out of town. Only 50% of the people that attend my church in Groton live in Groton. So we're drawing 50% of our attendance from towns as far away as Colchester and Rhode Island. So,
are you the only church like this in the area with that, with a certain type that you are?
No, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Yeah, no, there's 4.
Really?
Well, there's a bunch actually. There's we've got one in Niantic, New London, Groton, and Ashway, Rhode Island.
Have you noticed a drop off though, as far as in the general sense of things, from people being as religious as they, let's say, used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
Every mainline church, every mainline denomination, Roman Catholics, Baptists, all the Protestants, we're all losing members, and New England is actually hemorrhaging faster than other areas of the country.
Why?
There's a couple. I think the church has shot itself in the foot a couple times. Yeah. With these televangelists in the '90s, if you remember them, the Jimmy Swaggarts, Jim and Tammy Baker. I mean, they did some crazy stuff. They said some crazy stuff, and it was embarrassing to Christianity, quite frankly. You got these clowns in the Westboro Baptist Church that are doing some horrible things in the name of Christianity. That's not good. Yeah, the Catholic priest scandal, and people see that. The media gloms onto this, and they say, hey, look, religion is bad. And as the country, I think, drifts away a little bit from the church, it's no longer, back in the 50s, you went to church to be seen, that's what was expected.
Right.
And that's no longer expected in our society today. You don't have to go to church to be a businessman. It used to be if you were running a business, you showed up at church on Sunday.
That's a good point.
And so that's not necessarily a bad thing.
So do you think then it's more that people just have so much, it's going to sound terrible, they have so much more to do, so they don't set aside time to go to church? Or do you think that there is somewhat of some moral decay, if you will, and people just don't care anymore?
I don't think everyone talks about moral decay in society. I don't think that what we're experiencing in our world today is any different than what St. Paul found, perhaps in the city of Corinth. If you read his letters to the Corinthians, there's tremendous moral decay in those cities. I mean, so people have been bad. We're all sinners, and we've been sinning. I don't think anyone's invented a new sin in America in 2015 that hasn't always been there. It's just our culture's changing.
Right.
I think the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade devalued life. I think people respect life a little bit less. I think the loosening up, the birth control in the 70s, the sexual revolution, I think that's changed things, and people don't like being told they're a sinner.
Right. Fascinating conversation we're having. Andy Sorenson is with us. Pastor Andy Sorenson is with us here in the studio. I'd asked this question a while back, And I get a pretty interesting response from a lot of different folks. But it seems like there is a concerted effort to prove that God doesn't exist, right? You've got science who is, constantly trying to figure out how and what and why some things happen, where maybe there's just not an answer for why those things have happened, or, that kind of a scene. What do you think would happen socially, morally, to the planet if, in fact, tomorrow someone said and figured out that really, I know it's a hypothetical and certainly something you don't want to think about, but if there was no God, in other words, people seem like, and especially from the left, they want to push and push and push to prove that the God doesn't exist. And I kind of feel that. Well, what do you think would happen? I think it'd be chaos. I think if the world knew that there was no answering for your actions, I think people would show very terrible colors. That's just my own opinion on that.
Lee, if that would be probably the greatest tragedy to happen to mankind. If science, if there was never any doubt that if there was someone said, nope, it's all made up, there is no God, it would be absolutely horrible. People that go to church have a greater sense of hope, less depression. I mean, Americans are taking more antidepressants these days than ever before. And church attendance is dropping. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so.
Right.
Church gives you that sense of hope, that future. There's just so much positive that comes out of believing in God and understanding that you were made.
Right.
Lee, God made you. He formed you in your mother's womb, and he knew your days before you were ever born, and that's special. And he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for you. And that speaks of love. That's what love is. Love isn't a feeling, Lee. Love is a verb. It's an action. It's something that you do because you care for somebody. That's what God has done for us. And to take that away, to strip that away would be, I don't even want to think about it.
Do you think God actually has a plan for everybody, or has he just kind of put the ball in motion and letting everything kind of play out as it plays out? Do you think, in other words, do you think he knows I'm going to pick this pen up and put it down? Do you think he knows that, do you think every action is sort of, he's paying attention to that, or she's paying attention to that? Or do you think it's kind of just started and, I've given you this free will, now do with it what you will?
Yeah. So God is a spirit. You use the he, she thing, and that's a big controversy sometimes with the church. I want to say God is a spirit. But he chose to define himself with male pronouns, so I use male pronouns. But I understand people feel free using others. But does God know everything? Sure, God. We say God's all-knowing, he's all-powerful, and he's everywhere. So he knows it. Scripture tells us he knows the number of hairs on your head, or in my case or your case, the lack of hair on your head. But he cares for every sparrow that flies. He takes care of the flowers in the field. So he is. He's shown throughout history in Scripture that he comes down to earth. At the Tower of Babel, it says God came to earth to see what these crazy men were doing. Right. He came to earth when he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to live among us. So he's an active God. He's sustaining the world through his spirit.
I have to ask then the next question on this, which is not one that's good, is that, if that's the case, then how does some of the horror that happens in this world happen if God is supposed to be watching everybody all the time?
Yeah, so people ask that all the time. How can a loving God have allowed this to happen? And sometimes you don't know. You look at the book of Job. If you're not familiar with Job, he was a great guy. It says he was a righteous man. He loved God, and one day Satan came up to heaven and said, "Hey, Job only loves you because you give him good stuff." And God said, "Well, okay, you can take away everything but his life." And so Job was persecuted. He lost everything. His children were killed, his business destroyed, his property taken away. And he said, "The Lord gives, the Lord takes, blessed be the name of the Lord." And he confessed that one day he'd seen his Redeemer standing on the earth with him. And Job's like, "Why, God? Why did you allow this to happen?" And God said, "Who are you to question me? Were you there when I hung the stars in the sky? Were you there when I told the sea this far, no farther? Were you there when I put the Leviathan on the earth?" So sometimes we just don't know. We don't know what God's doing.
All right.
But we have to trust him that it all works out for our best.
Well, Pastor, I enjoyed meeting you today. I thought it was, and I would have these conversations with you all day. To me, it's interesting, and you teach me something every time I ask you a question. You know, the answer, although sometimes it may not be completely satisfying to myself or anybody else out there, it's still always good to have. I think it's really good to have these conversations, and you're welcome to come back anytime. Please keep the emails coming. And where is your church in case some folks want to come out?
So we're located at 625 Pequannock Road. We're right across from Hilltop Express, or on the way to the airport in Groton.
All right.
So,
Pastor, I can't thank you enough for coming out here. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent.
You're listening to the best of Lee Elci on 94.9 News Now.